Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. Before I introduce my very special guest today, I want to share some exciting news from my company, Grow Strong Leaders. We've recently released a self-paced online leadership development program called GSL Skill Builder. It helps strengthen 36 character skills and 10 high-impact communication skills that every leader needs to be effective. And it's focused on participants putting a skill into practice, not just acquiring new information. So there's real behavior change over time. I invite you to check it out on our website, growstrongleaders.com. And now I'd like to say that I am just delighted to have as my guest today, Ilias Simpson. Ilias, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Meredith. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Well, so am I. And I want to just say first a big thank you to my former guest and a fellow podcast host, Damon Limby, for recommending you as a guest for my show. I'm so glad to have you with me today, especially after our initial conversation and listening to your interview on Damon's The Learn It All podcast. I learned so much more about you that I'm eager to explore with you today. Let me tell my audience a little bit about who you are, because I know they're going to be excited to hear from you too. Ilias is a superb example of a leader who's focused on his own growth, and he's also committed to the development of every person in his organization. In fact, he shared with me that his personal why is to inspire others to achieve their potential. I'm going to explore that with him today, and I'm confident his answer will be valuable to you. Ilias has served as president or CEO or both of 3 different companies, each with thousands of employees. And he was senior director of operations at Ryder Systems, another very large company. Ilias is also a decorated veteran of the United States Air Force. So thank you for your service,
Absolutely.
Ilias.
Hoorah, Air Force.
And it's so interesting because it's true for all of us, but in particular for you, you had some early experiences that really shaped not just who you are, but who you show up as a leader, starting with your childhood. So I'd love for you to share with us, what were some of those formative experiences for you when you were younger, say up through high school, that really had a strong, lasting impact on you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were several things. I mean, I think, first and foremost, thanks again for having me. Very excited to be here, and shout out to Damon and Darren for their work and for connecting us. Yeah, so, for me, my childhood is definitely a major part of who I am in a lot of different ways. And I think, just to kind of briefly touch on it, I come from very humble beginnings. My father went to prison when I was 3, 4 years old, and then my mother joined the army to take care of my brothers and I. So I think first and foremost, right there was work ethic from my mother, and showing that you do what you have to do to make sure that things get done. So that was one of the early experiences. But then what came as a result of that was moving around quite a bit as a kid, moving every 2 to 3 years in terms of cities, but also just because we were a low income family, often moving within a city because we were renting a house, and so constantly entering new environments, new schools, was definitely a part of what shaped my personality in terms of being able to adapt. The adaptability and being comfortable in different environments was a necessity for me. So,
Mhm.
my
And
mom
you
eventually.
also, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say my mom also eventually remarried and married a man who was going to college while working while we were growing up. And so there was another example of someone doing things to better themselves and better their life, and seeing that example was an early thing for me of, okay, if you
Mm,
want more out of yourself and more out of life, there's things you can do to continue to grow and develop. And that was one of the early examples I saw of that was my parents doing
mm,
that.
hmm. And you played sports also, right? In high school, and was it also in college?
Yeah, yeah. So I played sports in high school, all the sports, football, basketball, ran track, all that good stuff, and then ended up playing college football at the University of North Texas Division One program. So that was definitely a lot of my leadership style, and a lot of my work style also comes from sports, and the focus on a team environment, but also the focus on development, right? Like in sports, you're constantly trying to improve your craft. You're constantly trying to get better. And, you go into the off season and there's things that you need to get better at. And it's up to you as an individual to work on those things. But also what I observed was the coaches and how they would give you feedback and the advice they'd give you and tell you what to work on. And something I saw at an early age is some people listened and some people didn't. It was always, and I think a lot of what could get people to listen, some of it depended on the coach because you had inspirational coaches that could get more kids to listen. But then there was also, if the message didn't resonate with certain kids and they didn't necessarily work on the right things. But definitely the development side of my leadership style and personality definitely is influenced heavily by football and sports growing up.
And when you were in the military, I remember you telling me that at age 18, you were put in a leadership role, and that was challenging for you. Talk a little bit about how you were able to build trust, get cooperation from people who were older than you. That was not an
Yeah.
easy situation.
No, that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. So I'm off at college, and again, I grew up military, so I love the military from watching my mom. My grandfather's also retired Army. He's passed recently, but um, I ended up joining the military my freshman year in college as a way to just have some extra money and just get some experience. And I go off to basic training, and they put me in charge of the entire dorm, 60 other folks who are mostly older than me. I'm literally 18 at the time. And what I quickly realized is that just because the drill sergeant said I was in charge didn't mean people necessarily liked it or cared or listened, right? So there was definitely a element of, okay, they said you're the boss, so I'm going to do what you say, but that's not effective always, right? Like there's a certain level of, okay, I'm the dorm chief and you have to listen to what I say, but that's not how you actually get the most out of people, is what I learned. What I learned is that as people got to know me and they got to understand what motivates me, and as I got to understand what motivates them, I could connect with them in a much different way. And I remember, for example, there was a gentleman, and I'm going to use last names because that's what you remember, but there was a gentleman with the last name Goon in my flight. And at the time, he felt so old to me. He was like 29 or 30 maybe. And I remember thinking, wow, this old guys in basic training. And of course, now looking back, he wasn't old, but he had a wife and kids. And so the way he thought about his experience and what he was going through was very different than someone who was 18 who just left home for the first time. There was another gentleman named Roebuck who came from a small town, I think in Nebraska or somewhere. And so he was experiencing a lot of different things for the first time. But understanding what each of those individuals was going through, and that Airman Goon was missing his family, and that Roebuck was being exposed to diversity and other things for the first time. They were all having these different experiences, and being able to understand their experience so that I could motivate them and keep them engaged was incredibly important. And we ended up winning a bunch of awards for our flight. I won some individual awards as the flight leader, but then our flight was recognized as an honor flight, which is a huge honor. And the reason that was able to happen was because of the way we came together and actually got to know each other and figure out what makes each other tick. We were a better team as a result. And I had four guys that worked with me as I was the head, and then they were kind of my four first sergeants, if you will. And I got them to follow that same model. Like I would make sure that I'd say, hey, listen, when someone's having a tough time out there at drill, make sure you understand, are they struggling today because they're hot and tired? Are they struggling because they miss their family? Like, let's make sure we understand what's going on with our team, and we keep people motivated. So yeah, that was a huge experience. And then accountability, that was definitely came with that. And everything that happened was I was responsible for, whether I did it or not. So that was my first interaction in terms of understanding that as a leader, you are ultimately accountable for each and every one of those individuals, and that's a lot of responsibility.
Hmm. Those are all such important points. And I just couldn't love more the fact that you focused on investing time to really get to know each person. And that's something that, with the challenges leaders have today with the time crunch and feeling like they have so many things to do, that it's difficult to carve out that time like you did to get to know folks. What would you say to someone who is struggling with that? How would you describe to them the benefit of investing the time in getting to know their people individually?
That's a great question, and I think every leadership role is different. But what I tell my team is that if you are in a leadership position, and I always say leadership position versus a management position, but if you're a leader of people, then that's priority number one, is to be the leader of people. And so anybody in my business, in any one of my businesses who's a manager, you're a leader first. And so when you think about the time crunch, time managing your time is all about managing your priorities. And priority number one as a leader is your people. And so for me, it's first of all having that understanding that if I'm going to do one thing well, it's going to be take care of my people. Because if I don't do that, then I'm not really being a leader, right? Um, but then also, of course, I think there's you still have to run the business, and there's still things you have to do, meetings you have to meet with customers, you have to manage other things, and I think it's just a matter of also being able to leverage your team, right? And so as I mentioned in the previous story, I couldn't personally connect with all 60 people, but I had four other people who were leaders underneath me that could do it as well. And so, sometimes it's not about you, especially if you're the CEO of a company with 30,000 people, you're not going to connect individually with each one of them. But it's about setting that example for the other leaders that I'm going to connect with my team so that they understand they need to do the same. And then it just trickles throughout the organization. But
Mhm.
there's a reality to being very busy, and having to balance between clients, financials, people, the issues that, outside issues, whatever they may be. But I think it's about setting your priorities. And as a leader, your number one priority is the people within your organization. And I know there's people who will say, well, as a CEO, your number one job is to take care of the shareholders. And the reality is that you're not taking care of the shareholders or the stakeholders if you don't take care of the people, because most businesses, I actually believe all businesses, are still people powered organizations. Amazon's a wonderful technology company, but they have hundreds of thousands of employees. And without those employees, nothing moves, right? So to me, as a CEO, what you're ultimately responsible for is making sure that the people do a great job so that whatever product it is that you're making or delivering is done well. Your experience, for example, with Amazon is based on how well your delivery driver does or how well that facility gets that package to you. And a lot of
Mm.
that is people. So if that delivery driver doesn't feel taken care of and they don't take care of your package, then your experience is ruined just because somebody didn't feel that they were being taken care of. So at the end of the day, time management is always a challenge. But if you're a leader, your priority needs to be people.
Hmm.
And if you
And
handle it
as
that way,
I'm
you'll.
hearing you say that, I'm thinking about where on your calendar do you have the time blocked to
Right.
have those conversations, right?
Yeah,
Because that's where it really shows up what our priorities are, is on our
absolutely.
calendars. Where do we have the time allocated for what we say is most important?
Absolutely. And I think that's I do believe in some sacred time on the calendar that you dedicate to people. I also don't think it's always the quantity of time. It's about the quality of time. It's again, as a president and CEO, oftentimes I'd only have 5 minutes with a person. passing him, wherever. I remember I ran into an employee of mine in the airport, and I took the 3 or 4 minutes they recognized me and they stopped me, and I took 3 or 4 minutes to just kind of chat and ask them where they were coming from and what they were doing and how was their trip. And it's the quality of the conversation in that time, in that moment, that employee remembered and mentioned to someone else, not how much time I spent with them.
Mm-hmm.
It was the fact that I asked about what they had going on and how they were doing. That's what they remembered, right? So for me, it's about quality more than quantity, also.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point because it can provide some sense of relief for people that they don't have to, spend huge amounts of time. I think that the key, as I'm listening to you, is fully being present with the person, like you were with that employee, where you are asking about them and not trying to impress them or, or talk to them or at them, but instead be present with who they are and what they are in that moment.
Absolutely. You're spot on, and I think people, they feel that when it's genuine and it's authentic, and they recognize that you're a person just like they are, right? Like, I'm walking through this airport just like you. I'm trying to make a flight. I'm dealing with all the same stresses and emotions of this airport, and I think allowing people to see that brings together a connection. And and again, I think it's definitely checking in on the individuals and asking about them, and being able to balance, both what you ask about professionally versus personally. And, you can't just always have personal conversations with people. I'm actually not a person who gets too personal, um, but there is something to be said in just asking somebody, how's it going? Then they can
Mm-hmm.
decide what they tell you, right? They may talk
Mm-hmm.
about what happened in the meeting they just came from. They may say, "Oh, well, my kid just had this happen," but it's giving them that freedom of just asking how they're doing, and then whatever it is they decide to talk about, then engaging appropriately within that conversation. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but for me, that I genuinely care, so it comes natural. But I think I've had leaders who maybe aren't as naturally social and empathetic and caring, who can practice and they figure it out. So, so to those listening, if it doesn't come naturally to you, just like anything else, practice will make perfect, and you can get there.
Yes. Yes, it makes me think about your sports experience. That continued practice, putting in the effort, the time to improve a specific skill, you will get better. And the role of, coaching and accountability is so key. Well, let's take this to the next level. So you spend the time with people, but one of your key areas, of course, is helping people expand their vision of themselves. And there are, of course, are roadblocks to that because we all have our own vision, existing visions of ourselves. And so I would love for you to talk about how are you able to see someone's potential? And then how do you help them begin to look at what's possible for them beyond what they already think is possible?
Yeah, no, that is definitely, something I take a lot of pride in, is being able to do that. But also, it's something I put a lot of focus on. And for me, I think some of it comes from, again, we talked about, my beginnings and the fact that there were people along the way who said, "Oh, you could be a good, college football player," or, "Oh, you could make a good leader at a company someday." So there's people who saw things in me, that I didn't necessarily see in myself. And so that was kind of what sparked some of that for me. But I think what it really comes down to is, again, as you get to know people and as you pay attention, um, there are certain skills and certain qualities that you start to recognize in an individual, and that helps you to see maybe what they could be. And I'm big on, I've talked about this on other podcasts, I'm big on learning agility, and that versatility and adaptability, and being able to see how something someone does well could be applicable in a different situation. So I use that a lot for myself, but I also look at that in others. And I'll give a tangible example of that. There was a gentleman that worked for me named Christopher Moore. He interviewed with us when I was back when I was with Ryder. He interviewed with us. He was coming from Coca-Cola as like a sales rep right out of college. And had no experience working in logistics or managing people or anything, but had just been, selling Coke products at different retail stores and things like that. But during the interview process, what I noticed is that he was very people focused. His approach to sales was to build a relationship with the person he was trying to sell to, help them understand why they needed the product that he was trying to sell, and then convince them. He was very knowledgeable about the product, those types of things. And so for me, what I saw is, okay, he understands people. And so he could supervise people, because those same things, those same skills that you use to build a relationship to convince someone to buy something, if you have the learning agility, you can figure out how to use that same skill set to motivate an employee to do things. And his problem solving, that he would figure out what product they needed and how they didn't realize they needed that product, that was applicable in logistics too, like that ability to think outside of the box, how to solve a problem. And so for me, I think because I approach everything with this kind of adaptability and learning agility lens, I see that in other people of, okay, here's somebody who's got some traits or some skills that could make for, a great role later. And so we ended up, the other leaders were like, we can't hire this guy. He's never supervised in a warehouse. We end up hiring him. He does a great job. Here we are, 10 years later, and he's a general manager for Amazon. He's grown tremendously in his career, all through logistics leadership. So, um, for me, I look for those, and I love what you were saying in the beginning about the assessment that you guys are coming out with, the Grow Leaders, because there are a lot of different traits and skills that leaders need to have. And sometimes people don't realize they have them. And sometimes you have to look for those traits, because they may not be in a leadership role. So how do you find the traits and skills that somebody has, but they haven't had a chance to demonstrate maybe in the traditional way? So being on the lookout for those is really important. And like I said, for me, one of those is being people focused. One of those is, he had high integrity. There was skills that he had that made sense for him to be a leader. And I
Mhm.
look for those.
I love that example because it demonstrates to me, and I hope everybody is listening to this, the skills that you brought that made it possible for you to see those capabilities in him. Because the other people involved who were against hiring him were kind of looking through this narrow lens of what experience does he have that will equip him for X. And you went, I would say, below the surface there to look at what does all this mean? And I like the term that you use, learning agility, and I want to explore that a little bit more. I just don't want to move too quickly from the fact that you really listened to him and extracted who he was because you were fully present in your listening with him. And that's just so rare these days that people listen at that level beyond the superficial or the surface to really sense who's really there.
Yeah, I had another example recently. I promoted a woman named Rochelle Ferrara, and I actually posted about this on LinkedIn as one of my proudest things. She was a VP of account management, and I ended up, we had a couple of candidates to be the senior vice president, and I ended up choosing her, despite some of the other executives maybe thinking I should go a different route. And with her, it was similar. I noticed that she had incredible work ethic. I noticed that like she would do anything for her clients. But also, what I noticed, Meredith, is that her work ethic wasn't just external. And what I mean by that is she didn't just work hard to show up at meetings and things like that, which she did. She worked hard on herself. And what I noticed is that, she was constantly attending trainings to help herself. She had signed up to do some public speaking. So she took some classes on public speaking. And so what I saw is somebody that understands that if I take on something, there are things I need to do to get better at it. And so for me, what I saw is like if I put Rochelle in this role, even if she's not all the way ready, she's going to work her tail off at doing the things she needs to do to develop. And so, there was, and I knew that if I gave her some specific things to focus on, like the financial acumen and continue to sharpen her leadership skills, that she would put in the work. And she absolutely did. Like she absolutely did, just as she had done with everything else in the past, she studied the financials. She wasn't required to do that in the past, and that's why she didn't have the experience. But again, what I saw is that she didn't have experience public speaking either, and she got it. She worked hard at it. She took class, so she did the same thing, and she's still in that role today and thriving, and doing a great job. But it's being able to see beyond, like you said, the surface, and not getting stuck on, you know, do you have P&L experience? And the person says no, and you stop, right?
Right.
Like, because,
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
I tell people all the time too, like, if I use P&L experience as an example, I like to simplify it because that's such a big thing in the world of leadership and in corporate America of, oh, have you ever managed a P&L? And I'll say to people, people say, well, I've never managed a P&L. And I'll say, well, have you ever managed your bank account? Like there's similarities to
Mhm.
other things you've done in life. And if you've built a budget for your family and managed that and figured out how to successfully survive and do things, it's the same. If there's a lot of it's not the same, but there's a lot of the same
Mhm.
skills that can be
Yeah.
utilized. And so that thinking outside of the box and that being willing to look for skills and traits is so critical versus just focusing
Mhm.
on um,
You know,
tangible things.
thinking about what you're saying about learning agility, seems like there's two aspects to it. One is to recognize what it is, the ability to transfer, skills you have here into something else. But the other is the self-awareness to, like, you are so good at helping people raise their awareness of the connection and the ability to transfer something from one place to another. And so to me, that is such a powerful strength of a leader that I hadn't really thought about it as much until this conversation, with how rare it is, I think, for people themselves to see that transferability of skills that they have to something else, and how someone like you serves such a vital role in keeping them from limiting themselves by not trying something new because they think, I don't have this credential, or I don't have, I fall short in some way. And you're saying, but that doesn't matter because you've already done XYZ. And you, so your belief in them about what's possible for them, it circles back to what gives you your passion in life, is,
Absolutely.
is that vision you have for each person you're interacting with that they may not have for themselves.
Yeah, and not to get too philosophical, but and this always shocks people, but my undergrad degree is sociology. I have an MBA, but my undergrad degree is sociology, which is rare for an executive. But where that's helped me a lot is that understanding society and understanding people, in the sense that a lot of those limitations we feel were placed on us by society, right? Like you kind of grow up in this world where you just see things being done a certain way. Or and for me, going back to the childhood, what I noticed as a kid very early on is, and I've shared this with, I believe, with Damon. You go from one school to the next and everything's different. What's popular is different, what works is different, like what's considered good academically is different, like everything's different. And so you start to realize that, like, okay, we're all kind of being fit into this group, and you've got to be able to think beyond that group sometimes. And societal groupthink is a real thing. And so for me, I try not to get too stuck on the limitations, like you said. I think people kind of naturally limit themselves, and like you said, I am absolutely inspired to help people see beyond those limitations that either they placed on themselves or have been placed upon them, either consciously or unconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Well, that to me brings up the topic of diversity, because I know you're a big believer in diversity, not just racially, because you've certainly experienced, I'm sure, challenges over the years as a Black youth and then as a Black man in different roles and positions. So, but for you, it's so much broader in terms of diversity. And I would love for you to share what that means to you and how you've brought diversity to the various roles that you've been in.
Absolutely. I think diversity of thought is the key. in business, right? And
Mhm.
for me, and again, I shared a little bit of this in the past, but people all are diverse. Everybody's diverse in the sense that we're all different, right? And of course, you have the traditional diversity of people who are, underrepresented groups and things like that. And I'm not taking away from that. That's a very real thing as well. Um, but you have to be able to see beyond that, and that each individual is unique, and that you, in their experience, is valuable. And you have to figure out why their experience is valuable, because everybody's experience is valuable, and you need to be able to say, okay, I'm going to figure out what about this person's experience is valuable to this organization and how I can leverage that. What I am very cognizant of, and I encourage people to be very cautious of, is that when you think about diversity, diversity of background and experience is critical. And so you might have three individuals who are all different races, but all have very similar background and experience. And so the diversity is going to be there, but it's going to be limited, right? Because their experiences will be slightly different because they're different races, so they can go through the same thing, but have two different experiences. However, if you take me and Damon, for example, we're both athletes, so there's going to be a lot of things that we see very similarly. We're going to see things differently because Damon's white and I'm black, and so we had different experiences, but there are going to be some similarities. And so I think for me, diversity is really about having people from different thoughts and perspectives come together, because that is how you start to get this out of the box thinking. You increase the awareness of everyone around you. You have different solutions to problems because you have people who solve problems in different ways. And there's times where a different approach is needed, and if you don't have that diverse team, you might be missing the opportunity to have that approach. I love to have a team where, whether racially or otherwise, it's diverse, because we can always lean on one person on the team for different scenarios, right? Like I've got my person that we lean on when we're having people issues, my person that we lean on when we're having financial issues, when, the person that we lean on when we need innovation, and being able to have diverse perspectives and diverse background and experience really helps in that regard. And you create a much more productive team. And a lot of that for me comes from sports and the military, because, you don't build a SEAL team of snipers, right? You build a SEAL team of people with different skill sets so that that team can go in and accomplish a mission. Somebody's good with computers, somebody's good with, you got the sniper, you've got the medic, you got all these different things, right? And so again, diversity of background gives you a better team. Same thing in sports. If everybody's just good at throwing the ball, but nobody's good at catching the ball, you're not going to be a very, very good team. And so the same thing applies in business, that you've got to have that diversity of background and experience. And just by, again, kind of the way society is constructed, you will more likely get that if you pursue diversity in race, gender, identity, and other things. So it doesn't have to be about that, but generally that helps you as a start to start
Mhm.
getting different background and experiences. And then you dig even deeper within that.
Well, one of the things about diversity is you avoid the group think, but you also run into situations where there could be conflicting opinions, not just differing opinions, but people, and especially today where people
Yeah.
tend to polarize. What would be some ideas if we have a listener who's dealing with a situation where people tend to get polarized quickly? What did you do to help diffuse that kind of exchange or interchange or avoidance for that matter
Yeah.
and help really bring people together so they could hear different perspectives?
And this is going to come full circle a little bit, in that it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, that, as a leader, it's about people. And, as a team, we've got to get to know each other as people. And when we start to see each other as people, we start to see that we all have the same goals. We start to understand, as at least the same goals for the organization, but that we all maybe have different motivations in life, and there's things that we maybe don't know about one another. And again, you don't have to get too personal, but just being able to understand that this person maybe has a different motivation than me on a day to day, but that's okay because we're ultimately trying to achieve the same thing for the organization. I think that awareness is important, and I think building at least that basic connection and understanding of, um, not everybody's like me, not everybody thinks like me, is really important. And I talk about that with my team. Like we make a point of that, and part of what I do in to help everybody comfortable with that is I share things people wouldn't expect about me. Right? Like,
Mm.
that's an easy way to start. Like I often like to show some vulnerability and maybe share something that people wouldn't expect, and that immediately lets them see like, oh wait, Elias is similar too. Elias gets nervous speaking in front of the employees just like I do. So I don't have to feel so bad about that. And then somebody else speaks up about something, or maybe I'll share something I'm not very good at that somebody else on the team is good at. Now everybody's like, oh, okay, like, and they start to see like, okay, we all have a role and we all have a spot. And that
Mhm.
my spot isn't in competition with this other person's spot necessarily, but it's complementary. So I think that helps with the conflict, is helping people to see that, it's the collaborative nature of the team, not the competitive nature of the team that allows you to be successful. As a team, you should be competing against the problem, not against each other.
Mm,
So
I like
if
that.
you can do that, you're going to be a great team.
Hmm. That's so good. Well, the other thing that you mentioned when you were talking about sports and what was so important and is so critical for leaders, but some of them are not that comfortable with it, is this whole area of feedback, both giving feedback and receiving feedback. So you had some pretty good, I don't know if good is the right word. You had a lot of experiences receiving feedback when you were in sports. And I'm sure you had coaches who did it really well and others who you learned from them what not to do. What has been your own approach to when somebody needs feedback? Performance has fallen short or they've made a major mistake and you need to address it with them. What's the approach you take?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, timing is everything. And to me, um, you know, having a sense of when it needs to be immediate versus when it can wait is the first step, right? And so I'll give an example of that. If somebody makes a mistake and is distraught and is really, there was an example where we had a finance person who accidentally shared a bunch of salaries of employees with everyone, which is a major mistake. You can't do that as a finance person. You can't make that mistake. However, in the moment, the person was so distraught that wasn't the time to get on them about it. Right. So that
Mhm.
was well, let's focus on control of the situation. Let's figure out what we do about it. Now, I absolutely have to come back at the right time and address that, because you can't make that mistake. And but the way I did it is, I started with one, how good the person is at their job, how valuable they are. Then I acknowledged that they were in the middle of doing a bunch of stuff because it was budget season and they're working on a lot of different things. But then I told them that you can't make that mistake, right? Like that mistake is critical and it caused a lot of headaches for a lot of people, um, that it wasn't intentional. But then I also complimented them on the fact that I recognized that mistake bothered them probably more than it bothered anybody else. And so I think for me, timing is critical. Sometimes it needs to be right away. Sometimes you need to figure out the right time and place. But I think also being able to have a constructive conversation around the feedback, explain why you're giving the feedback, why it's important. Um, but also, typically nobody's bad at everything. If they're bad at everything, then it's they shouldn't be there in the first place, and that's a whole other topic. But so how can you weave in to make the conversation constructive? How can you weave in some positive vibes and some other things and make it a more constructive conversation? I literally had this conversation with my wife this morning. My wife Raquel and I were talking, and there was somebody who had a misspelled word on their bio, And she was like, oh, I don't want to embarrass them. And I'm like, it's embarrassing that the words misspell. I was like, so you're actually, so I was like, and she was like, well, how could I do it? And I was like, well, when you pulled up the bio, you said you loved their picture. So why don't you call them up and say, hey, I was checking out your bio. I love your picture. It's great. By the way, did you mean to say this word versus this word? Because it comes off as a spelling error, right? So now you've completely taken the person's defensives down because you complimented the photo, and now you're able to give what you might see as critical feedback. Um, but if you care about that person and you want that person to be successful, then you owe it to them not to let them have that spelling error. So it's the right thing to do, to give feedback, especially when it's needed. But it can be challenging, and I think there's ways to lower people's defenses, and you have to understand that people are naturally defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course the old adage of make it about the problem, not about the person, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can do that, like obviously don't call somebody up and say, "Oh, you can't spell," that's no, don't say that, but
Mm-hmm.
also give them honest feedback.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love your approach. It's so consistent with what we've been teaching leaders and writing about with leaders for a long time. The context, so that they see this error is not this one isolated thing that's a judgment that's going to be held against them, but putting in the context of how they normally perform, which is usually quite good, right? But here we have this example of something, as you said, that can't stand in terms of being repeated. It's not something that's possible. So being willing to address that head on, because I think what I've seen over the years is many leaders are hesitant to give feedback. It's uncomfortable or can be for both parties. But what I love about your approach also, Elias, is that wanting to preserve the dignity of the other person. So when they leave, they feel encouraged and not stripped down, you know?
Yeah, no, you're
That to
spot on.
me seems to be your approach in all ways that you interact with others. And
Yeah,
I just love that.
yeah, and just to give a quick example, so because I know somebody's out there thinking, well, that's if the person's good at the job. What if they're always messing up? And for me, if they're always messing up, then it's a question, right? Like it's a question. Like I've had that experience where somebody's just not doing great at much of anything. And I sit down and ask them, hey, how's it going? And, how do you think your performance is? And you know what they say? I think I'm doing great. And then it's like, okay, well, why do you think you're doing great? And, maybe they'll give you some answers. Maybe they'll say, well, I don't really know. And then, but it comes back to you as a leader, because to me, oftentimes it's one of two things. Either they think they're doing great and you don't, which means you guys have misaligned expectations. Because if you have aligned expectations, they should know whether or not they're doing great. And then if your expectations are aligned, then the conversation goes differently. And they say, yeah, I know I'm falling short. I've missed these couple things. And then usually they know why. Usually it's, I've got something personal going on. Or, I'm not really interested in this anymore and I want to do something different. Right. But it's being able to get to that and have the conversation in that way that you're able to help that person. Because in my experience, Meredith, people don't do a bad job on purpose.
Right.
I've yet to run into that individual who's like, well, I'm just messing up every day because that's what I'd like to do. Like generally people are trying to do the right thing. So being able to understand what might be preventing that, whether it's you didn't set clear expectations or whether it's, they're distracted or bored or whatever. And then being comfortable as a leader that if they're bored, I own that as well. Right. And I may not have something else for them. And that may mean it's time for them to go do something outside of our organization. But you own that, right? And you can't have an employee who's bored and doing a bad job because that's hurting everybody else. And so you either have to figure out how to get that employee excited again or how to get that employee to go somewhere where they're not going to be bored because that's what's best for them as well.
Hmm. Yeah, that's just such an important aspect of leadership. There's a word that just popped in my head that to me applies to everything we're talking about here, and that is noticing. Noticing what's going on with someone else and being willing to invest the time to talk to them about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you got
So
to take care of the people. And
you
part of taking
do.
care of
And
them
I
is
love that that's the thread across everything that you've said, and your approach is taking care of the people. And so as we're wrapping up here, is there anything else that's occurred to you that you would like to share with my listeners today?
no, I think the one thing we didn't touch on much, and as I think about listeners, you, you still have to be an expert on the business in all of it is all about the people and things like that. But also part of being able to help the people on your team is being knowledgeable about what it is that they do, being knowledgeable about what's happening in the business, because part of the same way that you need to care about what's happening in their life and their performance and all that, if you don't understand the business well enough, you're not going to understand why they might be struggling, what challenges they might be facing, or what their day-to-day is like. And so being a president, CEO, being a senior leader is hard, and it does require a lot of work. And it's, to me, it's a role where you do have to be both an expert on people and an expert on your business.
Hmm.
And so, just being one or the other is not good enough. And missing one of those two is not good enough. You can't just be an expert on the business and be the leader. You can't be just an expert on people and be the president or leader. There's
Hmm.
other roles you can do for sure. But if you're talking about a president or a CEO or any role where you're kind of leading the people and P&L side of the business, you've got to have both for sure.
Hmm. I just thought of one other thing real quick. As you were talking about the business, and I was thinking about how serious it is. I know that a sense of humor and having fun is also an important part of your value system. So how do you
Absolutely.
incorporate that into caring about the people and caring about the business?
Yeah, keep it light first and foremost, right? Like it is serious business, but it's also people's life, right? And we spend a lot of time at the office or with our coworkers. And so for me, you want to make it something people are enjoying. People generally do well at things they enjoy, right? Now, I've shared this on a Damon's podcast that people don't make it to pro sports if they don't love the sport. And as hard as you're working, um, in when I was in college and I'm working out, I'm doing that because I love football. I don't love lifting weights, but I love what it's going to do for me. And so I think making sure people have something that they can look forward to and something that they can enjoy in their work helps them to work hard. When people feel like there's some reward or recognition at the end, and everybody likes different rewards of recognition, but for some people, they want that actual award. For some people, knowing that their boss is going to go out with them and have a nice dinner and tell them good job and laugh and joke with them, that's the reward they look forward to. So I think giving giving people something that motivates them and that they can look forward to, and understanding that it's different for each person, but that it's enjoyable and it's something that they consider fun is really important. And you can't take yourself too seriously, right? Like I think that is definitely a key is being able to just show people that you're human, right? And that you make mistakes and admit that you don't understand stuff, right? Like I think that's important. That helps us because that's another thing that I'm very big on is I never want to appear like I'm just the smartest person in the room all the times. Like that just immediately gives people a little bit of defensive kind of nervous feeling if they feel like you're um, you're looking down on them or whatever it might be. So um, a trick I do with my peers, for example, is I'm always asking for their opinion, whether I really need it or not, because I just want to know. I want them to know that their voice matters. So um, anyway, we kind of digress from a sense of humor, but I think the point is that if your workplace isn't enjoyable, um, people are going to be less motivated,
Hmm.
and people like to laugh, right? People like to
They
laugh.
do. They do. And, it doesn't have to be the kind of thing where people are laughing all the time. But if we
Right.
don't hear them laugh at all, then I think that's a clue for us that maybe we're taking thing, the whole thing a little too seriously. And I love that you said lighten up because I think that is such a good motto to have about ourselves, first of all, because we do take ourselves so seriously much of the time. And if we can lighten up, admit we've made a mistake, and not get hung up about how we're looking, what others will think, or any of that, and just get past it, and they know we're human. I mean, they already know we're human. It's just that now we're acknowledging it, and we become more relatable to others when we are willing to own up to our own mistakes and humanness.
Colin Powell has a quote in his 13 Rules of Leadership where he says, "It's bad now, but it'll look better in the morning." And I think for me, that's a way of saying lighten up, in the sense that, things get better, right? Like, and what might seem like the end of the world right now, you'll have forgotten about it in 2 days. Like I'm sure you've heard where they tell you to think of your most embarrassing moment, and you think of it and they're like, all right, now think about the people who were there, and ask yourself if they remember it. Right. So, I think there's a level of, not getting too up or down at
Yeah.
any one given moment, being able to kind of stay even keeled and keep it light is really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elia, this has been such a good conversation. Thank you so much. And I would love for you to share how people can get in touch with you, connect with you, and just find out more about you.
Yeah, no, LinkedIn is definitely the best place to find me. I do a lot on LinkedIn, whether it be podcasts or blogs or other things. I do have a blog out there that I, that I wrote years ago that's called Father, Executive, and Student, for anybody who's interested in reading that you can still find that. But yeah, I recommend LinkedIn if you're looking to get in touch with me.
I just want to acknowledge you, Elias, for all the contributions you didn't just make with my audience today, but through the years in your various roles as a leader, and the trickle-down effect you've had on the lives of so many people because of how you've chosen to lead others and care about them and help them realize their full potential. Thank you for who you're being in the world. And I'm looking
That
forward
means
to
a lot.
staying in touch.
Yeah, same. No, that means a lot. That's very humbling. Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, Meredith. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.